Okay, so hey everyone, my name's Victoria, and today we will be discussing hacking and the various ethical issues surrounding it. And this is Chapter 5, Crime and Security. Okay, so what we will cover is hacking, identity theft, and credit card fraud. We won't be covering whose laws rule the web. That will be covered by another presenter next week. So hacking, what is hacking? Hacking is the intentional unauthorized access to computer systems. So to many people, it means an irresponsible, destructive action performed by a criminal. It's a significant component of a variety of serious crimes like theft, whether that be theft of money, information, identities, or physical property, fraud, and sabotage. So there's a few examples, like the IRS reported that thieves stole personal information from more than 30,000 tax returns stored on their database. Another example, a hacker stole records from more than 100 million LinkedIn members. And this included their IDs, email addresses, their password, and the information was actually put up for sale. Twitter, Dropbox, and Yahoo have all been victims of hacking, and they didn't even know about it until years later. They didn't even realize. So the term hacking has really changed over time. First, we should really examine how the meaning of hacking has changed over time and how hackers carry out their activities. So like we mentioned earlier, hacking is typically a negative term. Used to describe individuals who perform activities like breaking into computer systems and intentionally releasing viruses, as well as stealing money and sensitive information. However, there are people who call themselves hackers who do none of these things. Even the authors of our textbook actually consider themselves to be hackers, so that's interesting to know. So let's talk about the three eras or phases of hacking. So era one, this was from the 1960s to the 1970s. A hacker was actually just a creative programmer who wrote very elegant programs. There was something called a good hack, which was just an especially clever piece of code. Hackers created many of the first computer games and operating systems. They sometimes found their way into systems where they weren't authorized users though. But they were mostly just seeking knowledge and intellectual challenges, and sometimes this included the thrill of just going where they weren't supposed to be. But most had no intention of like really disrupting services, and they frowned upon doing damage. A fun fact, the Hacker's Dictionary, it actually describes a hacker as a person who enjoys exploring the details of programmable systems and how to stretch their capabilities. So that really goes against the typical definition that's negative. So many conferences and venues still use the positive earlier meaning of hacking that reflects the high level of skill needed to push the limits. And as we know, even at UNO, people gather for hackathons to develop innovative new software and hardware products. So let's talk about phase two, hacking era two, which was from 1970 to the mid 1990s. So this is known as the rise of hacking's dark side. The negative connotation of the word hacker came about when computers became more widespread and more people began abusing them. Many people weren't satisfied with just pushing the intellectual limits with hacking. They began breaking legal and ethical boundaries as well. By the 1980s, hacking included spreading computer viruses, and at the time, that was just mainly like trading software on floppy disks. It also included pranks, digital vandalism, harassment. theft, whether that be of information, software, and sometimes money, and also something called phone phreaking, or phreaking, sorry, which is just manipulating the telephone system. So this is why the word hacking was driven to take on a more malicious meaning. Another fun fact, the movie War Games, it inspired many to attempt breaking into the Defense Department computers, and many were actually successful. I've never seen the movie, but I may have to go watch it after reading about this. And then for those of you that don't know, a worm is a program that copies itself to other computers. So in 1988, a computer program known as the Internet Worm, or the Morris Worm, clearly established the vulnerability of the internet as a whole to malicious hacking. It spread quickly to computers running a version of the Unix operating system, slowing them down by running many copies of itself, preventing normal processing. The worm affected a couple thousand computers, and systems programmers spent several days trying to decode and get rid of it. They found that it was actually a college student at Cornell University that was responsible for the worm. And it was widely debated whether or not it was an accident, since it didn't destroy files or steal passwords. But nevertheless, it certainly got people thinking about the potential to disrupt critical computer service and social disruption. So it led to the establishment of the Computer Emergency Response Team Coordination Center, which is referred to as CERT/CC. So this is really when adult hackers began recruiting other hackers for theft, fraud, etc. So we'll move on to phase 3, which was the mid-1990s on, and hacking became a full-on criminal tool at this point. Businesses, both small and large, and even governments began moving their records online, which led to an online explosion and thus a greater potential for hacking. Even basic infrastructure systems like water, power, hospitals, transportation, emergency service, and more became accessible online. So a lot of things, that we use daily were now accessible online. And as the World Wide Web spread, the reach of criminal hackers could now span continents. Epidemics caused by computer viruses spread rapidly and globally. For example, so I personally remember when the love bug virus was spreading in 1999, and it was all over the news. Basically, it was just a virus that destroyed files and collected passwords. And it caused the shutdown of many email servers for cleaning. Major corporations and government facilities like Ford Motors and even the Pentagon were affected. 80% of all federal agencies were infected. So it was pretty serious, and everyone was talking about it and really realizing the importance of internet security. The virus hit tens of millions of computers worldwide and caused roughly $10 billion in damages. So I came up with a discussion question. If you guys are interested, are there any major hacks that you remember, and what were they? Anybody?
I'm not familiar too much with it, but did you search up any other like hack that you can share? Because
There are a lot more that we'll get into in a little bit here. I was just curious if any of you all remembered any famous hacks that happened in your lifetime. All right, well, this slide here, it mentions political hacking and hacktivism. So I wanted to go ahead and let y'all know what that was. It's just the use of hacking to promote a political cause. And we'll talk about that more in a few minutes. And then denial of service, DOS, is mentioned here as well. And it's just an attack in which a botnet overwhelms websites, mail servers, or other internet locations with so many requests for service that normal users cannot access the site or services. So in some cases, the attack crashes the sites completely. So is harmless hacking actually harmless? So when we were talking about the different eras of hacking, we mentioned the excitement and challenges of hacking being a motivator for hackers, particularly young hackers with no malicious intent. Some claim that if they copy no data and change no files, then hacking is harmless, but is it really? The problem is when a system administrator detects an intruder, they can't really distinguish a non-malicious hacker from a thief, terrorist, or spy. So at minimum, they will have to expend resources, time, and effort to track down the intruder and shut off means of access, and then go back and make sure no data was altered and no files were stolen. So when this happens, the organization must bring down its internet connection, and it has to investigate the breach, which inconveniences employees, costs money, and possibly cause them to lose sales or work due to poor publicity. It also takes away the resources that could have been needed for other serious, like actually serious threats. Even if there was no negative intent, the hacker might view files containing confidential information. So for example, what if a hacker gained access to a medical record system, a credit card database, or payroll data? I know I wouldn't want my private information out there like that. I don't know about you guys, but also, what if a hacker makes a mistake? Even if they had good intentions, serious damage can be caused on accident, you know? So almost all hacking is a form of trespass, if you think about it. So should hackers really be surprised if others view them unkindly? Anybody want to comment on this? Do you think that non-malicious hacking should be viewed negatively?
I think it depend on um, the non-malicious hacking, because there are services where a company will hire what's called a white hat hacker,
Mm-hmm.
and their job is to find flaw and weak exploit. So white hat is one of the non-malicious one that actually don't mean any harm.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to talk about white hat hacking in a minute here too. Let's see. Someone said, if it's hacking to reveal weak/insecure code, I don't think so. Okay, for sure. So this thing is kind of slow on flipping the slides. There we go. Okay, so as I mentioned before, hacktivism is the use of hacking to promote a political cause. So just like typical hacking, political hacking can range from mild to highly destructive activities. So for example, a group of hackers modified the US Department of Justice webpage to read Department of Injustice, and they changed the CIA's webpage to read Central Stupidity Agency. And this was done to protest the Communications Decency Act. And the textbook didn't really go into what that was. So I got kind of curious and looked it up. And the Communications Decency Act, what it did was it prohibited individuals from knowingly transmitting obscene or indecent messages to a recipient under the age of 18. So I'm not really sure why they were protesting this act. Kind of weird because it seems to protect children, so I don't know. But anyways, a fundamental problem with evaluating political hacking is that it can be hard to identify. People who agree with the political or social position of the hackers tend to see an act as activism, while others who disagree see it as ordinary crime or worse. So how do you determine whether something is hacktivism or simple vandalism? Because it's so dependent on what the motive is, and I think someone mentioned that earlier, it's really difficult to develop a sound basis for distinguishing what's acceptable and what's not. So another discussion question, do you think hacktivists are merely exercising freedom of speech, or should hacking just never be okay?
I think it really depends on the case, what actually it involves.
Mm-hmm.
But in the case, like, it can influence something, it might be good or bad. So it really depends on the situation.
Yeah, base by base case kind of thing. I agree. Anybody else?
I think that any form of hacking that aim to carry a message or just simply sabotaging shouldn't be legal without that company or that other party consent. Like I said, like whether they were hired to do it or not. So I think that's what my opinion.
Because I mean that's still somebody's intellectual property that is being broken into. So for sure. So the textbook actually points out that freedom of speech does not include the right to hang a political sign in a neighbor's window or paint one slogan on someone else's fence. So if you consider web pages comparable to physical property, then hacktivism would not be acceptable under current standards. Also, in free countries like the United States, we all pretty much have access to social media where we can use our own accounts to voice our opinions and promote political causes. So we can just, hop on Twitter or whatever, and, we don't really have to hack into a government page to voice our opinion in free countries. But, there are nations, and it's sad because the nations that are least likely to tolerate hacktivism are the ones who likely have the most ethical justification for doing so. Like, countries where they are blocked from, using social media or certain web pages. They are the ones that could benefit from hacktivism to get their message across. But at the same time, they'll be the ones that are punished more harshly than in free countries. So it kind of, So now we're going to talk about like hacking by governments. So like someone mentioned earlier with the white hat hackers. So I think that's a good place to start talking about what white hat, black hat, and gray hat hackers are and what they are. So in old cowboy movies, the good guys wore white hats and the bad guys wore black hats. So the terms white hat hacker and black hat hacker are often applied to the cowboys of the computer frontier. Black hat hackers are those whose activities are destructive, unethical, and usually illegal, while white hat hackers, they use their skills to demonstrate system vulnerabilities and improve security. These include cybersecurity experts who strive to protect systems and provide early warning of potential threats. And then there's a third group called gray hat hackers, which have elements of both. So. Okay. So governments often hack for economic and military espionage and to disable enemies or potential future enemies. And it has increased dramatically. So sometimes the source of an attack is traced to a specific country, but it may not be possible to determine whether the attackers work for the government or are civilian criminals. However, the nature and the sophistication of the attacks and the type of targets can lead security researchers to believe that attacks are work of government agencies. So like, for example, there was an attack on Gmail accounts of the White House staffers, China policy experts, military officials, human rights activists, and others, and they were actually able to track and the attack down to its origin in a Chinese city where a major Chinese national security division is located. So, you know, it's pretty easy to put 2 and 2 together there. So the attack actually used a phishing scam, and I'm sure we're all familiar with phishing, but it's just when you're led to a website that looks official, you type in your password, and you know, you don't check the URL to make sure that it's correct, and now the phisher has your password. So emails were sent out. They were carefully written in government jargon about State Department reports to fool the recipients into thinking the emails were authentic, and then that led to the link, you know, and they were all phished. So the hackers stole several terabytes of information about one of the Pentagon's new expensive fighter jets. And this isn't the only time international hackers from China have been able to acquire top secret information. Other Chinese hackers actually had access to the computer system of a large US telecommunications company for almost 10 years before anyone even noticed. They stole technical documents, research reports, business plans, and more. So this brings us to the topic of cyber warfare. The Pentagon has announced that the US will treat some cyber attacks as acts of war and actually respond with military force. But there are many challenging questions about the use of cyber attacks and how to respond to one, such as when is a cyber attack justified? Is it an act of war? How certain should we be about an attack before we respond with a counterattack? How dangerous or deadly the side effects might be? And also, can we make critical systems safer from attacks in the first place? So I mentioned the Chinese cyber attacks a few minutes ago, but another one we're talking about is Stuxnet. So Stuxnet was a virus the US and Israel used to damage centrifuges used by Iran to enrich uranium. Since the computer and control systems of the facilities were not connected by the internet, it's assumed that a USB drive most likely introduced the virus. Sorry, I'm checking the chat, you guys. Okay. Okay, yeah, just a reminder for everybody to do the presenter assessment in Moodle after we're done. Okay, so like I was saying, Stuxnet, it was a virus the US and Israel used to damage centrifuges used by Iran to enrich uranium. And since the computer and control systems of the facilities were not connected by the internet, they have to assume that a USB drive most likely introduced the virus. So it could be like an acquaintance may have given one of the plant workers an infected drive, or the worker may have been a victim of a phishing attack at home on his personal computer, which then infected the drive. And once Stuxnet was introduced to the facility's network, it infected the control hardware and uranium centrifuges, and workers at remote workstations in the facility monitored the output as normally, but depending on the type of centrifuge, Stuxnet stressed the device by either just spinning the centrifuge way beyond its safety limits or greatly increasing the pressure on the centrifuge. So while the virus was stressing the device, it faked output to the workers monitoring the output so that everything appeared completely normal and they had no idea anything was even wrong, which I thought was pretty clever. it even hid its activity further by just not completely destroying the centrifuges immediately. It just caused them to fail periodically, but unpredictably. So it basically just made it look like the equipment was low quality to workers, and it was just not as well made as advertised. Okay. So why is the digital world so vulnerable? And why do so many attacks on sensitive data and devices, why are they so successful? Nearly every digital device or system, like your phone, your tablet, web-controlled security cameras and lights, TVs, personal computers, etc., have vulnerabilities that can be discovered and exploited. So there are a variety of factors that contribute to these weaknesses, including the inherent complexity of computers, the development history of the internet and web, the software and communication systems that run phones, the web, industrial systems, and interconnected devices we use, the speed at which new apps develop, economic, business, and political factors, and then human nature. So writing software to manage all of these criteria is a tremendously complex task that can require teams to coordinate thousands of employees like software designers, developers, testers. So it's not unusual for there to be mistakes with all those people, you know, working together. Mistakes can easily be made. So products must be constantly updated with patches to fix these errors, and keeping track with everything that occurs within the environment can be a daunting task for sure. A once secure system also can become vulnerable at any time. So vulnerability of the internet. In its early years, the internet was primarily a communication medium for researchers. So the focus was on open access, ease of use, and ease of sharing information. Many early systems didn't even have passwords because protection against intruders wasn't a concern at all at the time. No one really expected people to intentionally try to destroy the system. Security depended primarily on trust. It was designed for openness, and now it has approximately 3 billion global users and billions of devices connecting to it. So in the 90s, there was an internet security expert named Dan Farmer, and he ran a program to probe the sites of banks, newspapers, government agencies, and more to search for loopholes that made it easy for hackers to invade, disable, and damage websites. And he found that about 2/3 had security weaknesses, and hardly any of the sites even noticed. I think the textbook said like 4 of the websites even noticed that they had been breached. And his warnings had very little effect. Nobody really listened to him. So attitudes about security were very slow in regards to catching up with the risks. Eventually, security started to be taken more seriously, but it's a constant game of cat and mouse, since many tools on each side respond to the advances of the other side so quickly. Encryption is a particularly valuable security tool. Several early internet designers strongly advocated for using encryption, but it requires a large amount of computing power, which was very expensive at the time. Hackers have taken advantage of out-of-date encryption systems to intercept data, decode passwords, and ultimately steal debit and credit card numbers. Appropriate software patches and firewalls could have prevented this. And as it says on the slide here, firewalls are used to monitor and filter out communication from untrusted or suspicious websites. So it's a very helpful safety measure to keep systems safe. So we'll end the lecture with just a couple discussion questions. So the first one, and we kind of talked about this a lot earlier, is hacking that does no direct damage a victimless crime? What do you guys think? Anybody? Okay. Well, I believe, did somebody want to say something?
Yeah, it's quite situational on what, because it's kind of broad of like no direct damage.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's are many situations like if you hack into the government system or network, but you do no harm, that's still a breach of security, and that there are still consequences for doing the action of the hacking. So I don't think it's a victimless crime because you
Right.
did perform that action of trespassing.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Absolutely.
if someone trespasses your house, even though he did not do anything, he still did a crime of trespassing.
Exactly. I agree. Um, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's really difficult just to say yes or no. And it really depends on the circumstances. And it would be really hard to develop a sound basis for what's acceptable and what's not. But like you said, it can certainly infringe on privacy, which I don't agree with either. So the last question is, do you think hiring former hackers to enhance security is a good or bad idea?
Uh, I guess I would say it's a good idea because I mean, they kind of like know their specific way of, or like specific vulnerabilities that they've like themselves gone through,
Exactly.
and could point it out to like whatever company they're working for to better enhance their product. So yeah, it's probably a good idea in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. So there's this one guy who's an ex-felon, and he is actually, well, he went to jail for hacking, and now he's legally a millionaire. So he went to jail for hacking. He served his time for his crimes, and are y'all saying my internet connection is unstable? Can y'all still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So after serving his time for his crimes, he started bug bounty hunting, which if y'all haven't heard of bug bounty hunting, that is so hard to say, should definitely look into it because it's really, really cool. Like they have these websites where a bunch of companies will just post on there and offer a certain amount, like, you know, a bounty, and you can just go play around on their websites and see if you can hack into them. And if you can find a vulnerability, they'll pay you that bounty. So it's really, really cool. So now he's using his skills to earn an honest living. And if you look up the $1 Million Hacker, that's what they call him. And or you can look up Tommy DeVos, that's his name. There's a really cool YouTube video about him, and I'm sure there's tons of videos and articles about him. But if anybody has anything else they want to add, or if you're good, we can call it. Any other questions or comments? All right, well, thank you, everybody. Hope y'all have a good afternoon. Bye.
Bye. Have a good one too.